These dark images are statues of the Beatles in Liverpool. And the Financial Times, on the front page, the real red wall, is quoting somebody. It's taken as read that a government based in London has no idea what it is like to live in Liverpool and no interest in finding out. Now, of course, the financial magazine, FT magazine, is talking about Liverpool. This is Saturday, 17th of October 2020. And this is the weekend that has followed probably the most intense kind of exchange of allegations and counter allegations between Boris Johnson's cabal and the northern leaders, so-called, especially the northern leaders, personified by Andy Barnum. Now, Andy Barnum, the mayor of Greater Manchester, has now been exposed or revealed by the Boris Johnson supporting Daily Express today, that Andy Barnum played a role in a move to privatize parts or parts of the National Health Service. If you remember, on the 14th of October, in our diagnosis, exclusive wall diagnosis of Fleet Street, we condemned the Murdoch-controlled Times newspaper for running the editorial, Mea Culpa, a take on Mea Culpa. And it said that when the history books are written, the mayors like Andy Barnum would be treated and considered as the tribunes of the people against Boris Johnson or the UK central government. And we said that that was, on every level, that was wrong. Not only was it wrong to elevate the occupants in the posts of the mayor, but also to promote the idea of having more boroughs and regions lumbered with elected mayor. And it was wrong also to overstate the role of Andy Barnum and others. Later on that day, Barnum and others appeared at a press conference, which was then duly copied and reported by the ignorant mainstream in Britain. And from 14, 15, 16, 17, today the fourth day, there have been various forms of promotions of the mayors, and the main kind of evidence for promoting has been based on spin. The mayors, including Andy Barnum, are not and cannot be expected to oppose the narrative, the capitalist, corrupt narrative that is the main narrative and has been the narrative for the last 100 years in Britain, in British government policy. And Andy Barnum, as we said, was a member of the previous Tony Blair and Gordon Brown kind of years as, quote, labor named governments in this country, which lasted for just over or just around 13 years from May 1997 to May 2010. And Barnum, we said we would go into details of his record later at another time. The reason we said that we needed to have a detailed look at Andy Barnum's record is because his record is not consistent with any claim that he is a tribune of the people. Barnum, carrying the Oxbridge kind of tag, has been typically opportunistic and effective in connecting himself with the particular kind of forces and elements that allocate preferments. And he got a lot of preferments during the Blair, Blair, and Gordon Brown years in, quote, government. Essentially, Barnum is a right-winger in the sense that he's a kind of promoter of capitalism without any social or socialistic commitments. And he jumped on the bandwagon of the Liverpool people over the Hillsborough disaster in the way that he did in order to carry his image on the bandwagon as a campaigner, as a conscientious person, etc., etc. And it paid him off. It paid off for him because his profile in the run-up to the election for the mayor of Greater Manchester was enhanced significantly by his appearance on the bandwagon. That is not to say that he didn't have any personal passion for justice for the people, victims of the Hillsborough disaster and massacre. But that was not the only reason why he was on the bandwagon. He was on the bandwagon in order to keep himself as a caring person, as a kind of person with conscientious concern for justice for the victims of the Hillsborough massacre. He didn't use the word massacre, we do. And the fact that he didn't and we do distinguishes him from us, because he believes that justice could be obtained through the corrupt tiers of the English judiciary. Tiers, T-I-E-R-S, spelling on both kind of occasions. One is the corrupt tiers of the judiciary and the corrupt Boris Johnson tiers of the restrictions that he's now kind of railing against. And again, this time, Andy Barnum is less sanguine and genuine than he may come across as being. Because essentially all the ingredients of kind of attacks on civil liberties and the attacks on the idea of an NHS, idea of a society or social kind of provision for essential services, these are not things that are dearest to his heart. These are things on the list of his to-do things as part of the career, but not the dearest, not on the highest list. And here is the Financial Times on the Life and Arts, the weekend Financial Times. They are doing this thing about Liverpool. And it's somebody called Lindsay Henley, apparently explaining why her adopted home city of Liverpool had been so hard hit, and calls for an end to the political indifference that has long left it misunderstood and overlooked. Now, we shall be coming to see whether Lindsay Henley gets to refer to Boris Johnson's contempt for the people of Liverpool. As we said earlier, not today, but in previous posts, that the then leader of the opposition, Michael Howard, forced Boris Johnson, who was a member of the shadow cabinet, to apologize to the people of Liverpool after Johnson, as a member of the kind of shadow cabinet, had expressed contemptuous views about the people of Liverpool. And when Johnson was photographed, filmed, walking on the streets of Liverpool in front of the cameras, he said the phrase, "I'm a squashed lemon." So Boris Johnson is not somebody who's got a moral kind of authoritative, reliable moral integrity. When he was being forced to go to Liverpool and apologize or stage an apology to the people of Liverpool, he treated that occasion not as a serious one for remorse, but one for having a kind of fun. The fun that the entitled in British society assume is kind of granted to them. He wasn't really sorry for having expressed the contempt for the people of Liverpool, but wasn't sorry even to be exposed as an unfit member of the shadow cabinet, or unfit member of the post that he held as a member of parliament with some kind of discernible trace to responsible behavior. So it's this Boris Johnson who is now the subject of the bitterness that the people of Liverpool are feeling. It's not about there is absolutely no reason on evidence that any of the opponents anywhere in the north or anywhere else in England, opponents of the particular kind of restrictions and orders issued by the Boris Johnson fronted cabal, any of the opponents is kind of motivated by any rejection of the need to take care and be careful and observe restrictions. That is not the case. What is at the center and the core of the dispute is the contempt and the disregard and the lack of respect for particular parts of the kind of country and particular parts of the particular areas like Liverpool. And that is what the kind of anger has been and outrage has been about. So let's see what the Financial Times special writer Lindsay Hanley explains why her adopted home city of Liverpool has been so hard hit and calls for an end to the political indifference that has long left Liverpool misunderstood and overlooked. Now, she is not. Let's see what she is. I mean, why are they calling her her adopted city of Liverpool? Where has she been from? Where has she gone to Liverpool from? Where does she come from? Where did she kind of originate from? And they describe Lindsay Hanley as the author of Estates, an intimate history and respectable crossing and the class divide. So they don't say in there where she comes from, but she may appear to be describing her origins and her previous place in the piece itself. And what she's saying there is not going to be rigorous because the introduction, the write-up to her piece in the Financial Times says that Liverpool is misunderstood and overlooked. It is completely different from what Liverpool people feel, that it is actually disrespected. And it is even kind of blamed. It is even blamed. It's not misunderstood and it's not kind of overlooked. Being blamed as a city or as a region is very different from being misunderstood. And what Johnson did was to blame Liverpool people for the disadvantage and deprivation, massive deprivation and discrimination that they have been kind of treated with over decades. or longer. And the so let's say the paragraph or the paragraphs that the Financial Times editors kind of took this write up and this kind of introduction from, it is this: more than anger, though, there is a sense of inevitability and resignation that creeps into these conversations. It is taken as read that a government based in London and long detached from the historical recall that motivated Michael Heseltine to defend Liverpool to the rest of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet as a city worth saving from a managed decline, has collectively no idea what it is like to live here, and no interest in finding out. And there she probably is going to refer to that. In his former life as a journalist, Boris Johnson published an editorial in The Spectator in 2004 arguing that Liverpool's Liverpudlians possessed a peculiar and deeply unattractive psyche based on Victoria's victimhood and an excessive predilection for welfarism. This claim generated such anger in the city that Johnson was forced to put in personal visit, Operation Scouse Grovel, he called it, in order to apologize. But that is exactly the point. He still continued to underestimate and disrespect the people of Liverpool. If that is what he said, Scouse Grovel, then he was treating it as a joke. He was not showing any remorse whatsoever. What the editorial in the Spectator that Boris Johnson was quote editing when he published that attack on the people of Liverpool, what the editorial termed a predilection for state welfare was no such thing, given that Liverpool, once Britain's shipping and trade capital, made rich from slavery, had experienced the precipitous decline of its docks since the 1950s, followed by successive rounds of factory closures in the 70s and 1980s. The quality of the piece misnamed in Scousers a strong city-specific pride and a willingness to demand more, not less, of government remain in abundance, bolstered by the city's spectacular architecture and the fact that the whole world knows the Beatles and LFC, that is Liverpool Football Club. Such attitudes have long spanned the political divide. In the Northern Question, an expansive account of the North, Redwall, a continuous band of high coronavirus rates running from Liverpool in the west to Newcastle in the east. What unites the North in this sense, and what this red wall highlights, is the nature of working poverty. Now that's a piece that is discontinued. Let's read again this paragraph. Such attitudes have long spanned the political divide. In the Northern Question, an expansive account of the North, of the North-South divide, published last month, Tom Hazeldine, not Heseltine, it's Hazeldine, similar names, notes wryly that Tony Blair once told a fellow London-based Labour candidate not to worry about contesting a northern seat. And Blair is quoted here. I only have to go up once a month, he reportedly said. You can do the same? And in Hazelden's words, John Major contracted out the problem of Liverpool to the European Commission in the early 1990s, the difference being that in the long term, this had political dividends. Coastal Merseyside, Liverpool, Sefton, and Wirral voted with decent majority to stay in the EU in 2016, while the inland areas of the city region all voted to leave. Apparently, alone among the English ex-industrial regions receiving money from the EU structural funds, Liverpudlians have never experienced this reliance as humiliating. Rather, it was seen as an investment in the city that didn't come with London-centric strings attached. In last December's election, every seat on Merseyside except the Southport stayed loyal to Labour, while nearby Lee and Warrington South were two of 12 Tory gains in the northwest. Liverpool exists as proof that the north is not a monolithic lump. And in any case, a Liverpool football fan would remind you that we are not English, we are Scouse. A London-based journalist would never assume that the needs and general character of the capital and say Portsmouth, Worthing, and Swindon were identical due to being in the south. We know that in London, rich and poor people live cheek by jowl because plenty is written about it. Outside the capital, it's assumed that everyone is poor, and not only that, but they are poor in exactly the same way. Looking at a heat map of England's coronavirus cases this week, however, it was possible to see a north united by a phenomenon that differentiates it from the rest of the country. That unity is the real red wall, a continuous band of high coronavirus rates running from Liverpool in the west to Newcastle in the east. What unites the North in this sense, and what this red wall highlights, is the nature of working poverty. The economies of the Transpennine cities, that is Pennine regions, are almost entirely reliant on three sectors: hospitality and events, health and social care, and universities. On the peripheries of those cities, and on the edges of the towns and villages that link them, lie the logistics, warehouses, and meat packing factories that keep headline unemployment rates down, but mostly offer hourly paid casual work. And this is the kind of evidence. This piece, obviously, it's a long piece to read all of it in this edition, but the point is that there is an acknowledgement of the serious neglect and the policy of disrespect and disregard and contempt by the London-based politicos, even the likes of Tony Blair, who is not originally from London, he is from Scotland. So what the London-based political decision makers have done over decades is to neglect the entirety of these areas. As this piece indicates, this piece is not by any means a complete or comprehensive but truthful account, because this person herself is a kind of professional person trying to keep her kind of career options open. So she is not telling the whole truth, but she is telling enough truth to synchronize with the narrative that we have found on the evidence throughout the decades. And what she says about the people, poor and rich, living cheek by jowl, because it's written about in the South, is exactly the case. But even the fact that the poverty exists with the kind of wealthy people living in the South who are written about does not stop the poverty kind of being perpetuated and kind of perpetrated or caused. So there is a kind of signature, if you like, of the corruption and the kind of lack of democracy, lack of accountability, and lack of transparency in the political system, in the narrative that Boris Johnson is fronting, but the narrative that actually was perpetrated by and perpetuated by Tony Blair, of whom or whose regime Andy Barnum was a member of. That is why, even before reading this, we said that Andy Barnum was not somebody whose career record actually enhances, let alone justifies, any claim that was made for him, for the likes of him, in the Times main editorial on the 14th of October 2020, in which he and they, others, were kind of elevated to the point, to the role or status of the people's tribunes, that is the voice of the people. Now, as this particular Financial Times writer has said, Lindsay Hamley, it was Michael Heseltine who actually persuaded the other members of Thatcher's cabinet, where he was a member, to not let Liverpool decline, or not condemn Liverpool to a managed decline. Now, that is a very interesting kind of phenomenon, because what she's talking about, and didn't mention in that part anyway, is what happened in 1981. In 1981, throughout the cities like Liverpool and London, there were what is called riots. Now, I don't call them riots because they were more like football fans kind of events, but they were expressions of anger and frustration, mainly by gathered youngsters and young persons, at the lack of jobs and the lack of opportunities that the Conservatives had actually exacerbated after they were kind of allowed to win the election by the stupidity and the corruption of and incompetence of the Jim Callaghan fronted Labour kind of administration, following the 1976 resignation by his predecessor in post, Harold Wilson, who was ousted from office by a series of serious allegations and insinuations carried by the Fleet Street papers that we are diagnosing today. And at no time since 1976, when that happened 44 years ago, has anyone really examined or investigated why and how the Fleet Street media and the press kind of hounded Harold Wilson out of office, because they never left him alone. I mean, more interested in his kind of personal affairs or something, with the main feature being Marcia Falklander and his political aid, and his dealings with the people whom he ennobled, made members of the House of Peers. The real economic and social and political agenda that Harold Wilson was kind of following in his years before he got ousted, he was forced to resign. He never explained himself why he resigned. But this warrants, even now, 44 years on, serious examination why Harold Wilson was ousted from office. Because if Harold Wilson didn't kind of resign, probably he would have followed a policy that would have prevented a landslide victory by the Margaret Thatcher fronted Conservatives. That is the main significance of this, because Callaghan, I have called him a racist, liar, and a criminal because of his evidence. Callaghan was completely unfit. And I would compare Callaghan with Neil Kinnock, if Neil Kinnock ever got in. Kinnock was as bad, as ill-equipped, and as dishonest, and as racist. So these are the people that have let down the people of Liverpool and northern belts or northern regions, because they despite being Labour leaders, they never actually articulated the evidence. Now, this piece by Lindsay Hanley is a kind of examination, not the thorough examination she's making, but I'm giving an example that this is the kind of issues that should have been kind of examined and investigated by the Labour Party, by the Labour MPs, the Labour shadow ministers in various positions. And what happened with the Kinnock? Actually, Kinnock was regularly ridiculed by the London-based Murdoch-type papers as the Welsh windbag. That is the kind of mentality that the London-based, London-centric political power wielders show as their contempt for the people of Wales. I mean, despite the fact that I'm thoroughly condemning Kinnock's unfitness because of his record and because of his attitude, but I'm defending Kinnock against the anti-Welsh mentality of the London-based politicos and journalists. It is the same thing as if anyone condemns a Scottish person because of their kind of being Scottish, I would defend them, even if I wouldn't remotely agree with their policy, if that policy is not acceptable to me on the evidence and on the basic universal criteria that I follow and kind of obey and comply with voluntarily. So what is happening in the case of the Liverpool and Northern Red Wall being kind of condemned by Boris Johnson, who has been, we'll look at the Guardian's kind of treatment of it, who is being kind of challenged by Johnson. And we shall be looking thoroughly at the reasons for the decline. Although Hasseltine is credited in this piece by Lindsay Hanley with the opposition to Margaret Thatcher's rest of Thatcher's cabinet, which wanted to ditch Liverpool and sink Liverpool. Although Hasseltine did that, but Hasseltine's opposition to Margaret Thatcher's anti-Liverpool or anti-Northwestern or anti-Northern kind of policies did not last very long, as is clear from the record, because Hasseltine never got on with Margaret Thatcher, really. And Hasseltine resigned, and he walked out of a cabinet meeting in the number 10 Downing Street while ITN was live kind of broadcasting the event of the meeting. It was about the helicopter kind of scandal, European helicopter deal. But that was just a kind of tip of the iceberg. Hasseltine thoroughly kind of disagreed with Margaret Thatcher, which is why he took on the position that he did in support of Liverpool. And Liverpool people, as well as the rest of the North, despite the other kind of micro differences and difficulties there are about their role in slavery and their kind of participation in the capitalist, imperialist exploitation of slavery and the kind of benefiting of their kind of business and whatever from the abuse of African people and enslaved people. That is a micro kind of difference. Essentially now, it is a divide between not the expression North and South divide does not get anywhere near accurate, if you like, or accuracy. It is more than that, because this Lindsay Hanley piece acknowledges that one of the speakers said that we are not English, we are Scouse. Now, that is not confined to just Liverpool. It's confined to the people, the Gordies or Georgies in the kind of south, northeast. This is northwest. Liverpool is northwest and Newcastle is northeast. They don't call themselves English. They call themselves Geordies or Gordies, whatever the pronunciation is. And now these are These dates back centuries. Why do the people of the Northeast and the people of the Northwest feel that they're not English? It's not just an incidental remark, contemptible remark by the likes of Johnson. It is centuries old discrimination and kind of disrespect and bias against those people from the London-based kind of politicos and the London-based decision makers in so-called government of England. That is why they are English, but they are not English in the sense that the southern ones and the London-based ones are. So that is absolutely significant and very central kind of reason why the people of the North deserve much better than the Labour Party. And it shows again that successive or serial leaders of the Labour Party in Britain have been stupid, because that resentment is not a secret resentment. That sense of disenfranchisement from things English by these London-centric kind of decision makers, power wielders against the people of the Northeast and the Northwest is not a secret. All the evidence shows that that is open. Now, for a party that was founded to create justice in this country, for a party to oppose the conservatives' ideology and the narratives and the agenda, how can it be explained by that party to have missed all of that? Because the Labour Party should never have been even theoretically open to being taken over or replaced by the conservatives at the 2019, 12th of December 2019 poll, whatever the kind of other defects of the poll was. Where did the detachment from the realities of the people of Liverpool, Northwest and Northeast, and across the border, across the whole of the North, where did the divide between those people's lives and expectations and experience and the Labour Party leadership's empty brains, where did this come from? I have said before that Kinnock was, of course, unfairly called a Welsh windbag. He could have been just called a windbag, not the Welsh windbag. But apart from that, Kinnock was very deficient intellectually, and as was, of course, Jeremy Corbyn. Now, Corbyn and Kinnock are very different from very different kind of parts of the Labour Party narrative. But essentially, when it comes to the central collection of UK-wide or England-wide kind of decisions, or the decisions that affect the whole country, whatever the constitutional name and the arrangement, both of them failed. And Kinnock's failure was accentuated by the fact that he didn't understand the need for democracy, need for democratic accountability, need for local kind of people being respected on the local evidence, which is why he was venomous and he was poisonous in his denunciation of Liverpool City Council, or the Liverpool councillors who were kind of suspected to be militant people and fronted by the deputy leader, Derek Hatton. And the way that he condemned them, not only in the speech that apparently is being still celebrated as the Kinnock speech that lives, it doesn't live, it's a dead kind of example of the Labour Party being killed off by Kinnock, because that was the moment which Kinnock should never have abused in the way that he did. He should not have paraded the decision of the Liverpool City Council at the time as a kind of departure from democracy, departure from the needs of the working class, departure from the kind of unmet needs of the community in Liverpool, which is how he depicted it. The redundancy notices that were issued by the or threatened by the Liverpool City Council as fronted by Derek Hutton et al. These were not redundancy notices, but being the moron, Kinnock didn't understand that. These were tools of a protest by a local council representing opposition to the whole collection of policies by Thatcher. And that is what they were doing. They were trying to draw attention. And that is what campaigners do, trying to draw attention. But Kinnock played the role of a stooge for Thatcherite narrative. And that is why Thatcherites still celebrate Kinnock's attack on the Liverpool people. I have no kind of time for the infiltrators or people from the militant, whatever. But that was not the issue. The issue was, the challenge was for that council and others, how to confront Thatcher, how to stop Thatcher attacking the people. And at that time, this was not far temporarily. In terms of time, it was very much about the same time as Thatcher was attacking the mine workers. So it wasn't just the ordinary people in Liverpool, it was the mine workers as well. So when this Lindsay Hanley says that the Northeast is a region of working poverty, that is exactly correct expression. The Northeast has been poor, despite the fact that most of its people have been at work and have been wanting to work. They're not, nobody in their right minds, in their correct minds, would want to be dependent on welfare or benefit, which is completely insufficient, has never been sufficient to meet the basic bills and basic needs. And to call them, because of the region, the location, as people who have the natural propensity to depend on welfareism is a double outrage and insult and injury. And it's grotesquely inaccurate and untrue. Now, in their endorsement of the likes of Andy Barnum on the 14th of October, the Times, owned by Murdoch, controlled by Murdoch, did not go into any of that. It completely pretended that the Northeast, Liverpool, Greater Manchester, Newcastle, and the entire northern area or areas were the same as the South. Now, that is not the case. And the Times did not even have any room to possibly fail by getting the facts correct about the role of the likes of Andy Barnum. Because Barnum, although he is from a northern constituency, or he was as an MP from a northern constituency, he actually was following the southern, anti-northern bias and prejudice that Tony Blair personally kind of expressed and has been practiced by the likes of Johnson and others. So when Johnson says that he will defy the northern kind of voices, he knows that these voices are not kind of being backed by the ordinary people affected by Johnson's attacks, because it is the treatment. It is not the question is, as I said before, not about the need for restrictions, not about the need for taking action to stop the virus, to deal with it. It is the way that the London-centric kind of power wielders are insulting and behaving insultingly towards the people of the North. Let that sink in. And there is a lot of evidence There is a lot of evidence that the behavior of Boris Johnson and Boris Johnson fronted cabal can be discredited and should be discredited for the sake of democracy, for the sake of a just society, a fair society, and everything else. The COVID handling or mishandling by the Johnson fronted cabal contains daily evidence, running evidence of the lack of fitness to claim to be the party of government on the part of the conservatives. And this is not being pointed out. This is not being monitored, and this is not being exposed to the public by Keir Starmer. And Starmer, as he has proven, is not only a supporter of the conservative narrative, but he is also a supporter of the state of torture, or the torture by the state. This is the man who was supposed to be director of public prosecutions, and weeks before he left that job after 5 years, he issued a directive that penalized the poor people, or the poorest people, the people who were accused of applying for support from the welfare state. So there is no difference between the opinion published by Boris Johnson via the Spectator in 2004 and the opinion of Keir Starmer 9 years later, when he issued series of directions to penalize and treat as criminals people who were poor. Let that sink in. So that is why Keir Starmer, his support for the impunity in the bill that Boris Johnson is pushing through Parliament, taking through Parliament, impunity for torturers, state torturers of suspects. That is what he's supporting. And that is what the 7 of the shadow cabinet or shadow ministers have resigned. That is the least they could do. And that is at the center of the debate or dispute between the North and the South. The South includes the Labour Party, because the Labour Party, as fronted by Keir Starmer, is not voicing the call or the cause of the people of the North, who are being treated with contempt and with discrimination and with hostility and so on. Here is the other thing that is happening here in the papers. Osborne, who was one of the 3 members of the bullying done club while they were at Oxford. It's called Bullying Done Club, but I call it Bullying Done Club, because the club, Bullying Done Club, is essentially a secretive society which is kind of reserved for bullies. So it's on the role and the evidence of the Bullying Done Club that I call it Bullying Done Club. All 3 of them, Cameron, Johnson and Osborne, belonged to the Bullying Done Club while they were at Oxford. So you can see the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge. These are platforms for bullies and criminals. It is not the same thing as calling them educational institutions. These are not about education, about giving platforms and certificate and tags to assert entitlements in comparison with the rest of society. That is why there is no investigation into poverty, how the state and how the political parties create poverty and discrimination in this country. There is no evidence of any of that being investigated by the so-called highest tiers levels of universities in England, Oxford and Cambridge. No other university either, nor member of the so-called Russell group of universities is doing the research either. So academically, this country is being ill-served. The people of this country are being ill-served or disserved or done disservice to, as the people of the Northeast are now finding out from the discriminatory behavior meted out to them. But the judiciary is corrupt, and this is not a place to seek justice or fair redress from. And Parliament is made of crooks and criminals, unrepresentative of the people of this country. Against all that background, if the Parliament passes a law saying that there should be regional or local council mayors, it is absolutely factually sustainable to say that that kind of legislation would not have been passed by thinking about democracy, local democracy, or accountability. It follows, therefore, that despite the heavy heaps of anti-discriminatory kind of legislations in this country, there is no narrative of accountability by either local councillors, or elected members of parliament to their electors or constituents. So it's a kind of emptiness, it's a void, it's a huge void at the heart of England and heart of the UK, which is why there is this morass and the pandemonium about dealing with this particular pandemic, because there is no accountability. There is no evidence-based holding to account those who make the decisions or holding to account after the event. And for example, in the Hillsborough case, where the people of Liverpool are still denied justice about how the Hillsborough mass murders took place 30 years ago. So we shall be continuing this diagnosis in part